Mr. Haq, best recency of the floor. Is this privilege? Permission granted.
The integrity of our democracy is not a partisan issue. The integrity of our democracy is not an issue that we compromise on, and the integrity of our democracy is threatened by today's piece of legislation. So first, we have to understand that contrary to what Mr. Kennedy told us before we went on break, today's legislation actually discourages and disfranchises multiple groups of citizens. Now, Mr. Reagan told us about how this disenfranchises the elderly, but this also disenfranchises low-income and minority voters. As Sam Fullwood, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, explains, straight-ticket voting simplifies the process, making it faster and slowing down the lines. And while Mr. Dabrowski seems to think that this is only a marginal time difference, in urban cities, specifically low-income and minority areas, this makes a substantial difference, making the lines a lot faster and allowing these people to vote. If we affirm today's legislation, we're going to be disenfranchising those very people, because the people who are barely working to make ends meet cannot afford to wait for hours in line to vote. Single mothers don't have the time to go and vote if they have to wait for hours in line. By disenfranchising these people, this legislation becomes akin to voter ID laws and congressional gerrymandering. Decades ago, under Jim Crow, they made sure minorities couldn't vote. Now they say minorities won't vote. Let's prove them wrong. Let's make sure it's easy to vote. Let's negate today's legislation. But second, when Senator Wan talks about state-level corruption, of course we should be dealing with that, but eliminating straight-ticket voting altogether would actually increase the influence of special interests and lobbyists as well. And that's because, as the Texas Tribune explains, on March 15th of 2015, when they can't vote on party, the voters vote on name recognition and incumbency. And in order to develop that, politicians rely increasingly more on lobbyists and special interests to fundraise to fund their campaign ads. And so if we want to reduce the power of the dollar in elections and increase the power of the vote in elections, we have to negate. But finally, as Ms. Bavard and Mr. Wan also talk about, they say that voting on party isn't an educated decision. But if we affirm, then it's going to be worse than voting on party. At least if you're voting on party, you're voting on political ideology or a set of issues. If we affirm today's piece of legislation, though, these voters are going to be voting on a much worse criteria. According to studies conducted by the political science departments at UMass Amherst, Northern Illinois University, and Indiana University, there are three main factors besides name recognition and incumbency that these voters would vote on: gender, race, and physical attractiveness. And while that explains why Paul Ryan keeps winning in his non-STV state of Wisconsin, it's also indicative to the type of racial and gender inequality that today's legislation would perpetuate. If we want informed voters, if we want quantity and quality of turnout, then we have to negate today's piece of legislation. Thank you.
Time is 2 minutes and 58 seconds. All questioners, please rise. Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Dabrowski, and Mr. Joyce. Thank you. Senator, if straight party voting confuses over a third of voters, how does its prevalence shorten voting lines?
Here's the thing. In some areas it may be confusing, and we can fix that with state level, municipal level, and even federal level reform. But getting rid of it altogether would substantially increase the wait times that it takes to vote in various urban areas.
Thank you, Dabrowski. Why can't we fund the states to open more polling places and reduce those lines while still passing this legislation?
Well, here's the thing. We've been trying to do that for years, but partisan gridlock in Congress prevents us from doing that. As an alternative, we shouldn't just end straight party voting altogether, because that's going to disenfranchise more minority and low-income voters.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you. Can you specifically quantify the impact of these straight-ticket voting laws on minority turnout?
Well, the studies show that in the cities that have gotten rid of straight-ticket voting turnout, that had them before, it disenfranchised the low-income and minority voters.
Is it sufficient time for another question? Mr. Haq, yes. The parliamentary intent will let Senator Rothman be doing that. So we'll time. Thank you, Mr. Haq. Barring all motions, you may be seated.